Before we finish up the body of the animation together, I want to go over a few things that are going to be very important for you for future troubleshooting, future projects, and so on. I created this simple animation with one symbol, just moving around the stage a little bit. First thing that I want to talk about is inserting frames. So we've been talking mostly about the F keys, but there are a few other ways. You probably are aware that you can insert from the main menu, which is a little bit cumbersome, but there's also a feature right down here on the timeline. And if you hold your mouse over here, click and hold the mouse down, you can see that you can insert a keyframe, a blank keyframe, and a frame. So I want a keyframe, which means that it copies what was before it. In fact, the little icons here are very helpful. And I get it. And then if I go another frame out and I just click on this, it will do the last feature that it was set up to do. So let's say, for example, I needed to lengthen this out. Then I can go here, hold down the mouse, select just frame, and then if I keep clicking on this, it'll just keep inserting frames or tween frames between the two main keyframes. And if that wasn't enough, we also have the ability just to simply right-click and choose, for example, to add frames. Other things to keep an eye on in the program: you can always roll your mouse over these options, see what they do, try them out. So if you find that you're running out of screen real estate, you can temporarily compact the size of each frame. You can, of course, navigate along your entire timeline here. And a smart idea is to do just what I did here and make a separate document, one that you're not worried about messing up. And if you're not familiar with something on here, click on it, try it. If it seems like something you might be more interested in, Google it, see what you can do with it, especially when it comes to your final project. You have this option here, this little drop down, and you can change the size of your layers. Sometimes this can be handy when you have multiple layers, and what it does is it just lets you see the active layer only. So if you click on something and you have a whole bunch of layers and you're having trouble finding out where that is in the timeline, click this, and let's say you had 10 other layers. Those 10 other layers would temporarily disappear until you clicked on this again, and then they would come back. You know how to insert frames, insert blank keyframes, copy the previous frame. What if you get something like this and you say, oh, this keyframe here is not helping me any. I just want it to go from here to here. And the problem is now I have all this other stuff. Can I remove this? The answer is absolutely yes. And usually your best options are going to be found by clicking on that frame, right-clicking, and going in here and look at what makes sense. Does cut frames make sense? Then you go back and you look and you say, no, all that did was remove like potentially where there was a keyframe, it actually removed the frame, put a blank frame in there, so that doesn't help. It also broke, you can tell by this dashed line, your tween, so we'll Command Z that. How about this option of clear keyframe? Oh, I was on the wrong frame, so let me just back up one step here. Command Z until this gets unbroken. So we want to make sure that we are indeed on this frame, the keyframe. Control, click or right click, and this time we want to select clear keyframe. Now it actually cleared that keyframe out just like what was on there never existed, and now this goes from here to here. This is a good time to make sure that you understand what the properties panel can do for you, and that you also keep an eye on the library. So when you have an object and you're getting ready to tween it, and you're not 100% sure what it is, that's where the properties panel really helps. So let's say you have this and you say, yes, I want to tween this. I want it to go from here to, let's say, here. What type of tween should I use? Well, we know that we should be using a classic tween if it's not morphing. But then I guess the question would be, can I use a classic tween? And what can you classic tween? You can classic tween symbols, right? So we click on this. When we see graphic, we know that graphic is one of the three symbol options. You have a graphic, you have a movie clip, which we haven't talked about yet, and you have buttons. But if you see one of those three things, you know that it's a symbol. Keep an eye not only on the fact that you're in properties, but what are you in properties? We clicked on this object on the stage, it defaulted there, but as we've seen before, it can change over to frame on us, and that can cause problems if we're trying to do something like color effects. When you're new to this program, every time you are about to do a classic tween, switch over to your library. Look and see, okay, I've only got the symbols that I've made and properly named. Do your classic tween and make sure that nothing gets added to your library. Let's finish up this project. So the name of the game is Alpha here. And Alpha is not a great name in this program. I think transparency would be one that we're more familiar with, but that's exactly what we're doing, is changing the transparency. And here it says we can change the alpha, aka, and opacity is another great name for that as well, down and then back up. So let's go here. Let's make sure that we have object selected. We'll go to color effects, we'll go to alpha, and we are looking to bring that all the way down so that it essentially disappears. Second later with an F6, and let's do that again. Oh, sorry, my first F6 must have been an F5. F6, F6. And so now we're going to bring that back by the time it gets over to here. And let's adjust our text like we did for the last couple. F6 there, and then back here I can animate the opacity down, get rid of this. Next task is to animate a tint. Again, color effects, tint, and for our example we are going to tint to green 80%. Extend here, extend here, go back, adjust our text, get rid of the part we don't need here. Extend, extend, to our object, change our tint back to 0, and animate it. Here's a critical thinking question for you. We've just done our last animation. We need to extend the text. There won't be any more text added. What should we do? The answer is just simply an F5. Because if we do an F6, we're copying the contents over here, telling the computer that we may want to change that. If we do an F5, we're saying use as little resources as possible. We have completed the animation parts, but now we need to do a little cleanup in editing. If you watch really carefully and analytically at the completed project, you might have noticed that at the end it actually lasts for 2 seconds before it repeats. See if you can fix that. The solution, we just simply need to push these 2 frames out to here. A couple different ways to do that. One of the easiest is just simply click and drag across here. So let me click away and show you what I mean. So I'm just clicking and dragging across there. Now I'm just going to hold down my F5 key till it starts to move away. Then I might lift it up and then just tap it gently a couple times. Okay, another area, if you watched really closely, is where I explain that we copied a previous frame. Those intervals last 2 seconds as well. Let's find and fix those. We'll go all the way back to the beginning of our animation, which, since it's big now, this can be cumbersome. We can use this to step back, or we could just take this, drag all the way here. One of the techniques I like when I'm searching for something is the period key. It lets you step through and see where things are working and where they might be going bad. But if you just click and hold it down, it's kind of like a play button that you have really good control over. So I'm going to keep doing this until I come across the first one that talks about copying with the Alt key. There's our first one. So all we have to do, put our cursor up here, drag down, hold down the F5 key until we expand this section to 2 seconds rather than 1. And the best way to do that is to look at this and stop when it gets to here. And you want to make sure that both this layer and this layer, so look at the keyframes, are moving. All right, that's the first one. I'll hold down period key again and go searching for the second one. I'll just show you one more and then leave you to do the remaining corrections on your own. There's another one where I talk about option dragging. Click drag across my frames, F5 till I get out another second. Having fixed those 4 areas, my animation now ends at approximately 51 seconds. And if I wanted to know if it was exactly, I can just click here and it'll tell me up here at exactly what frame it ends on. So doing the math, that would be 1020 frames. So you can see throughout this whole thing, I'm 2 frames off. That's not important for this part of the project. If it was, I'd just have to go back to the beginning and just make sure that every one of the keyframes lands on a even number of 20 frame increments. But we're not going to get wrapped up with that yet. Very smart thing to do now, in addition to previewing, saving, and backing up, would be to open up a brand new document and just start experimenting with all these different things that you've learned. Go through, play your animation through, and let these sink into your head, all the different things you can do. Play around with them with a symbol or two, and then come up with your plan for the intro of this animation, which will be the focus of the next videos.